Oh boy, my faith in the video games industry plummets sometimes. And this is no different, as it's eerily reminiscent of a particularly dark chapter of game discourse, Gamergate. Let's get into it. It's been the hot topic in the gaming community for the past week or so, Sweet Baby Incorporated. And, well, what's going on, as you may be out of the loop or you may be firmly in it? Well, I'll let their website explain what Sweet Baby Incorporated is. Founded in 2018, Sweet Baby Incorporated is a narrative development and consultation studio based in Montreal and working around the globe. Our mission is to tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video games industry. We aim to make games more engaging, more fun, more meaningful, and more inclusive for everyone. Link to this in the description down below. And in response to more people being aware of Sweet Baby Incorporated, a Steam curator group named Sweet Baby Inc. Detected was formed. Now, for those who may not be aware, Steam is the feature storefront for PC gaming. It is massive, and there's a system called the Curator System, where you can follow individual curators to find out what they have to say about a particular game, and this curator group was simply detecting what games utilized Sweet Baby Incorporated as a consultation form or worked with them in some capacity. And my oh my, did this spark a wildfire on the internet. You had members of Sweet Baby Incorporated going after Sweet Baby Incorporated Detected, and battle lines were drawn, trenches were dug, and you know the show that goes on the internet. Now, I will say, I think if anyone actually believes that Sweet Baby Incorporated specifically are responsible for the perpetual decline of the AAA gaming industry, I got beachfront property in Colorado to sell you. They don't hire themselves. Someone goes out to hire them. And they aren't by any means the only company doing this, or engaging in these consultation capacities for game studios. But the internet discourse surrounding this overall controversy is sidestepping conversation in gaming away from actual discourse about the overall quality of a game and the development processes, and sidestepped it once again into another circular discussion that devolves to baseless name-calling and smear campaigns between two ideological extremes, where no actual progress to better games and a hearing of consumer voices can be done, since it's drowned out by the loud, vocal, and idiotic sides of the internet that have just found a new bandwagon to jump upon. And this happened back in the early to mid 2010s, if you weren't there, and has become quite infamous in gaming, well, would you call it history? I guess you would. Gamergate, where conversation about journalistic ethics in the video games industry and how diabolically bad they had become got pivoted to the same conversation between ideological extremes, where no actual progress to more transparent journalism and exposing of biases and anti-consumer practices happened. They were merely swept under the proverbial rug as people cried wolf or cried and tweeted about online harassment and threats. Which, this shouldn't need to be said, but are never justified. But it's a mix of people believing that any kind of disagreement constitutes harassment, but also sweeping under the rug all the actual critiques, because some people did legitimately harass others. But people en masse allowed that to be the end of it, and the base dialogue that so needed to be had never came to be, as the conversation pivoted to online harassment and ideological extremes. We have seen what has become of gaming journalism's reputation. It has become increasingly faded out of public importance because it's simply no longer needed, at least as it once was, with the propagation of streaming and videos allowing consumers to learn all they need to about a game on their own without a biased middleman interfering. It doesn't always happen, but it's far easier to find out information for yourself than it used to be, where you needed to wait for an article or a magazine to come out with the latest information. In the last better part of a decade, we have seen a swath of game releases with a focus on diversity and inclusion, concepts I am not opposed to. Where I personally issue a word of caution is when games are primarily advertised as having these things, to where it makes me doubt if they have anything else going for them. that's remotely original or special or even fun and engaging. When remakes or reboots don't focus on the source material, but instead rely on advertising and bragging of changes that were made to so-called modernize an experience, to me it makes it abundantly clear that there's no respect for what has come before, and that this piece of media has been shaped and fastened as little more than a receptacle for someone to regurgitate their personal worldview into something that they hope the mass market at large consumes spoonful after spoonful, where interesting and engaging storytelling techniques are cast aside for unfunny attempts at humor or embarrassing dialogue in situations that feel more like an insult to anyone watching or playing for wasting their time on the product instead of trying to create a truly memorable experience. I don't think Starfield having a choice to change your pronouns in the character creator was the main issue for the game. I think the game having poor storytelling and just the actual gameplay flow and feel to it were the issues, along with the optimization of the actual game. And when people push back on this trend and wave of vomit bucket games, the conversation is pivoted away from why these games are bad to more crap-slinging insult-driven Twitter threads and Reddit pages where people dig themselves into their proverbial trenches, never to move with the majority just caught in the middle, looking desperately in no man's land for a good game and a good experience, which are out there, but every now we are reminded of how far beloved IP has fallen because of just poor writing in general, and trying to make up for poor writing or poor gameplay development by trying to act holier than thou with social issues that were ham-fisted included into the game. I tend to find that a story is most interesting and engaging when it has a clear message, but that message is vague in a sense. It can be direct and upfront, but I don't want it to just feel like, oh, you took this recent news article, slapped some wizards and swords on top of it, and made a game of it. Games can be highly political and timeless with their messaging, it just needs to be included in a smart, cohesive, and engaging manner. I think Metal Gear Solid is one of the most famous examples of this. That includes deep societal critiques all the way back when it first came out that still apply today. And Metal Gear Solid is far from the only game that has ever done this. And I think the conversation that springs up time and time again, simply in regards to social issues or diversity, is a distraction, and actual conversations that need to happen are brushed aside and crushed under the weight of the voices that join in this inharmonious chorus that's an insult to the senses, and this is no different in my opinion, where people latch onto whatever they can and use it as a catapult to launch their clickable takes to try and garner some internet clout for 5 minutes instead of acting like a reasonable human being. The conversation pivots away from the actual stories being told in the video games media or medium and what they can be in the future, and pivots away to baseless drama online between personalities or wannabe personalities and influencers. At the end of the day, look, the mass market will decide what will succeed in gaming, and I think recently we have seen the utter failures that games like Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League have become, and how much of an overwhelming success games like Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, Palworld, and Helldivers 2 have been, and possibly soon we'll have that again with Dragon's Dogma 2, because they focus on being engaging, fulfilling experiences from beginning to end that more than justify their price. I think Baldur's Gate 3 in a lot of ways is a really inclusive game and experience on the whole, especially in terms of the sexuality. And I don't think a big stink was kicked up in regards to Baldur's Gate 3 because, well, Baldur's Gate 3 is just a really good game, and the game builds off of your personal choices. And if you want to go those routes, you have every right to do that. And if you want to go a different route, you can do that as well. I feel these conversations only really spring up for games that are just not well received because the actual gameplay proposition on display is subpar, or just not engaging. And people try and latch on to these social issues as if they're the reasons these games suck. No, the games suck because the game just sucks. So naturally, if the game just sucks on the whole, the way these issues can be included may also suck as well. But these games that I just mentioned, like Elden Ring, Baldur's Gate 3, Palworld, and Helldivers 2, to name a few, have been successful because they focus on being engaging, that don't try and beat the player over the head with their worldview in ham-fisted, uninteresting ways, but instead try and create a fun, fulfilling time, first and foremost, and in some cases, expertly convey their story through interesting and unique storytelling techniques, or actually funny and consumable dialogue that feels natural, and also brilliant characters. These are games that feel like they were designed with a simple question first and foremost. How do we make something our audience will love, instead of how can I preach and talk down to people? I think Metal Gear Solid 2 in a lot of ways is a great example of this, because that game is really preachy in its actual story. It's a giant warning about the effect on knowledge and the collective consciousness with the internet and the advent of social media. This is a story told back in the early 2000s, on the PS2, and it's a narrative that holds up to this day. But why does it work so well? Because the game's not subtle about this at all, because it doesn't need to be. Because the story works within the confines of Metal Gear Solid 2. It doesn't feel like they're doing like a Family Guy cutaway to tell you about some recent event in the world and to tell you why you're wrong to think the way you are. The way it's handled in Metal Gear Solid 2 is, you feel like you're experiencing this, especially if you played this in your formative years, right alongside the main character. Being able to take a step back and take a step out of your own specific worldview and view the entire world on the whole and the possible trends that it could go to. It's brilliantly written in a lot of ways because of, well, it can include these concepts in interesting and engaging ways that make sense for the story being told. The game doesn't treat you like an idiot. It just says, hey, we have a message, allow us to tell you what our message is. Instead of feeling like it's saying, hey, sit down and you will hear this message and you will agree with us. And if you don't, you are a piece of scum. Even if the intentions are pure, people aren't receptive to that style of storytelling. People don't like to be talked down to or demeaned. But if you respect their intelligence at least to some degree, some people may be more receptive to what you have to say, especially if you tell it in an engaging, fun, or just engaging way. We can go back to Baldur's Gate 3. Every main character in that story deals with some issue you could, like, draw a parallel to society. Shadowheart with religious fundamentalism or cults. Will struggling with his morality while being bound to, well, a devil. He sold his soul to the devil, despite being a moral person, and he suffers from that moral complex, at least throughout the parts of Baldur's Gate 3 that I've played so far. Karlach struggles with trying to regain her individuality, and decoupling herself from the machine that she was a part of for so long, etc, etc, etc. You can draw these parallels if you look hard enough, because these parallels are there, and each character tells their own narrative and their own story, but they work in the confines of Baldur's Gate 3, and they don't try to be a necessarily one-for-one analog to the real world. They make sense in the scope and context of the world of Baldur's Gate 3. And because of that, they're vague enough to where the player can draw their own parallels or their own comparisons to these characters in these story arcs. That's good writing in a lot of ways. I don't think there's necessarily a blueprint for perfect or good writing, but there's some guidelines to undergo to get on the right direction, in my opinion. So yeah, that's just kind of my overall thoughts and opinions on this whole Sweet Baby Incorporated thing. I think people are missing the forest for the trees. And I think there is an absolutely deeper conversation that the industry needs to have on the whole, in regards to how out of touch they are for most people. Like seeing Warner Brothers talk about how they want to go now into live service and like double down in that regard, despite the blowout success Hogwarts Legacy was. It just feels like you're completely out of touch with what most people and most consumers actually want. There's a reason games like Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3 have been doing so well, and games like Palworld and Helldivers 2 have been doing so well, because they know what people want. And they don't feel completely disconnected from the actual consciousness of gaming. It's all well and good to have a noble message and all that, and to have noble intentions, but if you can't incorporate them in a game in a fun and interesting way, or at least in an engaging way, don't expect people to be resident to it, or just to support the product because the message is good. Most people play games to either have fun or to be engaged with, not to be preached to. And no amount of a good message or putting in a bunch of preachy material will salvage a bad game. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions, and all this. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again.